Thank you for coming, for being here. Before we start, I would like to thank you, our partner, Equal Brussels, the hosting venue for Factory, and the moderator, Mr. Abdul Karim, and all our wonderful speakers, Mrs. Aids, Mrs. Wahba, and Professor Bayno. So, what is Womenquake? It is a global movement. We are in presence in several countries, and Professor Bayno is going to introduce to you our mission, is going to explain to you in a few minutes what we do and who we are.
Let me just give you just the background. How did Womenquake came about? What was behind its establishment? Imagine, or try to imagine, how the whole human history would have been if women had been able to bring to it, i.e. to the history, human history, all their capacities and potentialities. Imagine, had women throughout the human history been allowed or capable to bring all their capacities and potentialities to the human race, to the human species. And therefore, it's not too late to make that idea a reality. Part of human story, our story, there is this amazing truth, and it is this one. The human mind, the human thought, the human mind can transform the human history. Again, think about it. Every feature of the human world, from the greatest, all the empires, to the smallest, a small novel, comes from nowhere, but from within the infinitely and ceaselessly creative human mind. This is it. What we create is our product. Again, it is our ideas that drives us to despair or joy, creativity or destruction. It is our choice. It's our mind. We decide with our thoughts. It's the ideas we carry in our minds now that will shape the way we imagine and create our future. Now, this amazing power we humans possess stems from our incredible ability as a thinking species to self-reflect, to self-correct, and self-evolve. Now, with that conviction, which I've repeated several times in my, we've created Womenquake. And one of the Womenquake's objective is to facilitate the emergence of a new mindsets that are capable of reimagining and constructing a better future, both for human beings and for human society. The first step of this daunting journey is a radical change in our minds, a transformation of general human self-consciousness, a rejection of all the false fatalisms, and finally a revival of human self-understanding and self-confidence. These are the conditions which we need in order to reimagine and recreate human society. Now that's why Womenquake is designed to bring clarity and order to the seemingly hopeless confusion of our ideas about gender and the accumulation of distorted ideas we have about women. Finally, by joining Womenquake, you will be joining a revolution of ideas. And by taking part, you will also be shaking the foundations of the harmful ideas and beliefs that have driven human behavior as far as gender and women issues are concerned. And finally, you will be helping and reconstructing new ideas for better human beings and better societies. And
We have one question today, is to understand why is talking about women's sexuality continues to be a taboo in a society in the MENA region and in Muslim majority countries. That's the main question of today. Some of you might say, why again in the MENA region and Muslim country? Because the panelists who are with us talk usually about the MENA. I want to welcome my panelists. I'm happy to welcome the lawyer and founder of the Ruschd-Goethe Mosque, and she's also an author, and author of a book called Islam Needs a Sexual Revolution. We'll know today why does it need a sexual revolution. I'm happy to welcome Mrs. Seyran. Dina, a women's rights activist. She is Egyptian and she's very active in challenging the social taboos in Egypt. Ahlan wa sahlan, Dina. We just heard him, and now we're happy he's joining us also on the panel. International lawyer and today human rights activist. We're happy to welcome Professor Adnan, Amkhan, Bayno. One question is to Dina. Dina, what are your personal point of view? What are some taboos that you, as an Egyptian woman, feel you cannot talk about?
Actually, I find it very challenging to talk about the issue of women's sexuality, not just in Egypt, not just back home, but in almost every context I'm in.
When you talk about women's sexuality, what do you mean?
Any actually discussion concerning women's rights or gender, or challenging gender norms, or challenging patriarchy, I find it very challenging to discuss in a different context. It's always there's different set of risks and dangers. So back home, it has I'm challenging patriarchy, I'm discussing, I'm transgressing gender norms that are set supposedly set in stone, but also even when I'm in Europe, discussing, talking about women's rights in the MENA region is a challenge in itself.
What's on the ground? What's something you cannot talk, or it's a taboo?
In 2012, I was doing my master's in gender studies in London, and the issue of sexual harassment was widely discussed in Egypt, and sort of this taboo is being transgressed. But then discussing it in London, in different panels, somehow my narrative has been co-opted into a racist narrative that was used to demonize the whole Arab region. So it's always a challenge where and how to talk about women's rights in a way that it's not counterproductive. So controlling women's bodies and women's sexuality historically has been a trend that needs to exist in order to maintain a certain patriarchal economic and political system that protects men everywhere in the world, but it does manifest itself very differently in each context. But I think the greatest trick that patriarchy played on women in Europe, that it convinced them that it doesn't exist anymore.
Is it more in the MENA region and in Muslim countries that sexuality is a taboo? Because now I'm interested to know if you agree or disagree with Dina.
Absolutely, I think we agree on this point. If you look to North Europe, for example, we have a different or another situation than in the south of Europe as well. So we can say that the Scandinavian countries are much more forward in the point of rights for women. But this doesn't mean that they made everything perfect. They have also still their challenges. The Islamic countries on one side and the Western countries on the other side. And this was pointed out, in my opinion, in 1990 in Cairo, when the Islamic countries pronounced the Cairo Declaration and said, the human rights are not made for us. We are Muslims, we have our own culture, own religion. This is absolutely different than the Western culture and the other religions. We have our own Islamic human rights. And in this year, or since this year, we have this separation of the world in Western and Islamic countries. And beginning also from this point, we start talking about human rights in somehow different ways. People look to the Islamic countries and said the women there are much more under pressure, the patriarchal structures are worse there than in Western countries, which is not true. I try is to discuss about the taboo that in the Islamic countries, mostly there, there. Taboo is that women don't have the right for self-determinated sexuality, beginning in the age of a teenager, where they start to think about sexuality.
But does it have to do with religion, Islam, or with the culture?
It has to do with everything, tradition, religion, and culture together. You can never separate these 3 points. Tradition influence culture, and religion influence culture and tradition. So people take from the Quran some rules and say, because of religious reasons, women has to be virgin, no sexuality before marriage. But then somebody came and said,
but they also say man has to be a virgin.
This is the next sentence. Yeah, but also the man. But in reality, man have sexuality before marriage.
But that's
and
not religion, that's culture.
Yes, finally, then we are on the point of tradition. So we have the mix. That's the reason why I brought this example. You know, on one side we have the rules coming from Quran, religious rules for both gender. But finally, traditional culture, we have discrimination of women in this point. In my opinion, it's discrimination.
Professor Adnan, is taboo directly connected to the religion Islam?
Now, the first anecdote I would like to mention here is a definition. If you open the Oxford Dictionary of English and try to see what the English dictionary defines, what is the definition of sex, you'll find very interesting explanations or definitions. And if you think about them, you will see some of them are derived from biology. One which drew my attention, and I think it's extremely important and indicative, even in the Western culture, and it defines sexual intercourse as a heterosexual intercourse involving penetration of the vagina by a penis. Immediately you will see the role. There is a man who is the one, the doer, and there is the woman is the receiver. And that is already creates an image in our heads, in our minds, of what sex and sexuality is. And when a woman reads this, and when a man reads this, they create images in their heads about sexuality. Therefore, sexuality, you can define it in any way, and it is defined, and it is influenced. The definition itself is derived from the minds of people who actually speak that language.
I mean, maybe coming from Egypt, I always say, of course, women's sexuality are being controlled. Of course, it is not allowed. I understand that because I lived through it. I saw it. It was my daily life. The norm has been historically to control women's bodies. The fact that there has been a struggle and so many women were able to win rights that are not to be taken for granted now with the rise of the right wing all over Europe, that these rights could easily be thwarted or redacted, or these rights are now even up for discussion. But the norm is that women's bodies across cultures, across religions, across traditions are being controlled. And the exception is the fact that throughout history and struggles and women's movement struggles, they were able to escape that. But for you, maybe this is some sort of a why and how. For me, it was a lived reality.
But why is it not the way it is, as an example, in Egypt? If you look here, the power of man that could be used is different from it is in Egypt or in Jordan, for an example. Why? Are the most Arabic Muslim countries on the gender equality index are very, very on the last places? Is it religion? Is it economy?
I think it's you're talking about authoritarian regimes that really draw their own justification and reason that from patriarchy. These are authoritarian patriarchal regimes that thrive on sustaining a conservative patriarchal version of Islam, a patriarchal version of a certain tradition, and this is very important and at the heart of their political system.
A significant amount of our behavior is driven by religion. Even those who are liberal, as liberal Muslims, still cannot fathom and understand or even internalize
the idea of women's sexuality. Women's sexuality is not just having sex. That is not women's sexuality. Women's sexuality is the woman she believes that is what she is. And when you reach that level of understanding and that level of perceiving of the problem, then there will be no taboos. As long as religion sits in the background, a big percentage of our problems in the Middle East will...
We even go with the question of what is the reason behind, because for me it really has to evoke the discussion, why didn't we reach already enough women that change something? Like, where's the blockage that all the uppers and all the new ways of thinking have already reached people, and why didn't we reach enough yet? Like, it's already started, and I think that's a question to conquer as well, because it will give so much hope and so many initiatives.
I mean, like we just mentioned, women's rights activists and feminist movements are simply not given the space to reach anyone. Whenever they start working, whenever they start creating an impact, they're either arrested, exiled, threatened, whether by societal violence or state violence. And here I want to highlight state violence, actually. So I cannot judge, at least in Egypt, let's say, I cannot judge and say that the feminist movement was unable to reach, because they are simply, for decades, the regime has been invested in making sure that they do not reach those women that could change something.
I think the most important problem in our society is that the wrong structure of our values. Because the honor of the whole society is connected to the woman body, and no woman can be activist and she can just come up and say, yes, I have sexual life, and no one will judge her, and then she will lose her image, she will lose her power, and no one will consider her as a power woman, a respectful woman, or good woman, because good woman in our societies is a woman without sexual desire. She can have sex and that's what you just say. It's a mean for survival, and that's what the religion says, because we are not allowed to have sex out of marriage, because sex is just to bring children in the under marriage, and that I think is the most important.
The third point is related to our understanding of religion as such, because I tell you, I have spent a lot of time reading and reciting Quran, trying to understand all the verses that say women are allowed to do this and not to do that, and so on. And I swear to God, there's a lot of it also that's applicable to men exactly the same way. So if a young man of 22 years old goes to his parents and says, I want to have a sexual relation, it's just not going to be accepted. He would be kicked out, he would be insulted, potentially he would be hit by his father, something like this, because it is not acceptable. It is what it is. These are the rules, and it is not about, how do you say, it's not about only the oppression for women, it's really about societies being conservative, the understanding of what the set of the rules are, and then the reinterpretation of it is a completely different thing. The third point, I think I just touched upon it quickly, is I think when we say that sexuality is a taboo, is not really about people are allowed or not allowed to have sex, because I think everybody has sex. However, it's the expression of it. How do you deal with it? How do you talk about it? How can you touch upon it? Because I tell you, I'm from Egypt as well, and I think people are having a lot of sex, whether behind closed doors or in I don't know, accepted frameworks, whatever it is, in marriage, outside marriage, whatever it is.
They are from Palestine, and they lived in Jerusalem, and they had a Jewish friend. She's Orthodox Jew. She's a doctoral student, and she was forced to marry a guy that her father liked, because she's from an Orthodox Jewish family. And I have neighbors who are Christians, and they are so scared about their brothers and their father know their sexual life. So I don't think it's a question of Islam. It's a question deeper than that. It's about the human species, it's about politics and how the Middle East did not progress at all levels. It's not only women who are oppressed, also the gays, the people who believe in human rights. It's in all these issues. And unless there's a revolution that protects women and protects gays and protects opinions, there will be no solution.
For me, it's a matter of, sometimes I have the feeling that we are using religion as an excuse also. I think it's a narrative on a sense of politics, education, culture. It's a lot of narratives that go around this topic. And yes, according to different regions or countries, this have a certain power. But for me, it raises a question, the fact that I'm looking around and we are, in this room, we are the same profile of people. No? So basically having more or less similar values, similar opinions, or going into, at least in a similar direction and towards a similar change. So for me, is how do we push this type of discussions to a level of decision, which I think that's the critical mass, no? Like the mass of when do we talk about, taboo is something that we talk about. So we don't talk about sexuality, and sexuality is not about sex or intercourse, it's about having sexual needs, sexual preferences. No, it's the entire topic around sexuality as a topic itself. How do we manage to bring this topic, this discussion to a higher level?
Thank you very much. My name is Vanessa, and thank you very much, especially for the last 3 contributions. I think we went into a very different direction, thinking that leaving religion and going more to a narrative of society, patriarchy, families, and also, like this whole together which we live in, whether we talk about an Islamic or also a Western context. And you asked the question how we bring a new narrative of women's sexuality and women's bodies to a higher level. I think that is one question. My next one would be, how do we not only bring it to the higher level, which is the political level, but on our level of families. So I think there are 2 levels where we live in. We have the one from the top, that's the politics and the hierarchy we live in. And then we have the social, which are our families and our friends. So additional to this question, how do we change that?
From the very beginning, we pointed out that we have patriarchy in all over the world, in every religion, every culture, every tradition. And I want to remind you again. We also pointed out that there's always influence from religion to tradition and from tradition to culture. So I didn't give an answer for your question, is it coming just from religion? No, we have this influence from the one side to the other side. And this is what I always used to say, and I don't accept this discussion or debate to separate culture from tradition and from religion. We cannot separate that from each other. There's influence somehow more strong coming from religion, somehow coming stronger from tradition. So all over the world, in all religions. It doesn't depend if it's a Jewish or Catholic family, whatever. But what I thought we are discussing is, how is the situation now when we look to the Islamic countries and when we look to the Muslim families, especially also here in Europe? Why is the situation so different? And for me there are, yes, economical reasons, but the question here the first time from this young man was for me the most important. We have dictatorships, we have religious leaders who are using religion as for their political interests. The king's families using that for their economical reasons. And so we have such a kind of mixture that we cannot say it has nothing to do with Islam. It has to do with the religion.
So, thank you so much for everyone joining us, and it was very interesting and listening to all this different opinion. Thank you.